Better get yourself a drink here, camera fanboys. I'm about to say something controversial, and it's not just for clicks, because I actually have a little bit of thought behind it. So let's get started. Alright, so I recently have gone on like a 2-year kit binge, different cameras, lenses, all kinds of different stuff. And I've recently switched to Micro Four Thirds. This is my Olympus Pen F, which by the way is an amazingly beautiful camera. I just recently got that, so more videos coming about that later. As you guys know from my previous stuff, I have an EM5 Mark II. I've used a G7, a GX85, all Micro Four Thirds cameras. But I've also had the Canon 80D, I've had Canon 77D, I've had Fuji, I've had Sony APS-C cameras, and I want to address something. I want to address something that's going on the internet right now, because if anybody's watching this channel because you're clicking around YouTube and you're finding a bunch of different stuff about camera gear and camera equipment, inevitably you're going to end up reading a whole bunch or watching a whole bunch of videos on YouTube that tell you that full frame is the way to go. And thanks to Tony and Chelsea Northrup, fantastic channel, they'll tell you that Micro Four Thirds is dead. And I'm actually here to take a different position. I believe it's very possible that Micro Four Thirds could kill full frame. Let me explain why I feel that way. I got myself a little list of notes here on my iPhone, because I have a tendency just to ramble and I don't want to bore you guys too much. So I want to get through a couple points real quick to kind of just tell you why I ended up at the conclusion I did. And I want to take you back, at least in my opinion, as to why or what's happened in photography recently. Because I believe, even though camera sales are down, that photography is an all-time high. I mean, nowadays, more than ever, you see parents taking photos of their kids at soccer games more than ever before because of the invention of the cell phone. And as cell phones have gotten better and better, and the sensors have gotten better, and the technology's gotten better, less and less people have bought cameras. And specifically, it's been the death of the point-and-shoot camera market. And the point-and-shoot camera market originally, in my opinion anyways, was popular for a couple reasons. One was ease of use. You kind of just pointed and shot, and that's the name, point-and-shoot camera. But on top of that, it fit in your pocket. It was portable. It wasn't cumbersome. And the alternative, you know, between SLRs and then DSLRs, was this big camera body that I'm recording you on now. It's a Canon camera that had big lenses and was cumbersome, and people didn't want to take the time to learn them properly. And a lot of times, even though parents went out and they bought DSLRs, a lot of times just entry-level stuff like APS-C censored things, they ended up sitting on people's shelves a lot because they didn't want to bring them along or didn't know how to use them or all that kind of different stuff. And so then I think the point and shoot gained a lot of popularity because it was much easier to carry around and shoot, and it was easier to use and get photos. And the reality is that people were just looking for good photos. They weren't looking for amazing portraits or something a professional photographer would do. Okay, so the point and shoot market gets killed by the cell phone. And so now, if you ask me, the camera market looks like two categories mainly. Of course, there's niche stuff, so guys, you comment haters below, I know there's niche stuff out there. But mainly, people shoot photography with either A, a cell phone, or B, an interchangeable lens camera. I'll call it an ILC camera from here on out to quit saying that long acronym, ILC. So as more people have to decide between their cell phones and a interchangeable lens camera, I think it's becoming more and more evident that size is more important. And I think the camera makers understand this as well, because mirrorless, amongst other benefits, has promised that it will get smaller, lighter, and faster. And I think that's proving to be somewhat of a lie. I understand the camera bodies are getting smaller and they're getting skinnier because you can take the mirror box out. But all of the releases I've seen so far, the first attempts from both Canon and Nikon, are not small. Sure, the RP is smaller, and maybe there's more to come from that whole setup. But that doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, the optics that go on the front of those full-frame cameras are huge. And I think that's something you can't ever really get around, with the exception of a few prime lenses or some pancake lenses. You're always going to have large optics in front of a large sensor. Now, I understand the difference between Micro Four Thirds and full-frame sensors is that there's a difference in depth of field, there's a difference in light gathering, there's a difference in ISO performance. But honestly speaking, I'm using the latest generation Micro Four Thirds sensors, And the ISO is fine. It does a great job. In fact, you see a lot of wedding photographers, or not a lot, but a handful of wedding photographers downsizing their kit to either Fuji, which is an interesting case in point what I'm about to talk about, or some of the Olympus cameras or Panasonic cameras, because the new cameras can do a lot better in ISO performance. It's more about lighting. It's about being discreet and quick and mobile and not being tired at the end of the night. I get totally off topic and I lose track of where I am. This phone thing is not helping me very much. So anyways, as people start downsizing their kits because of weight, I think it's evident, I guess what I'm trying to say, it's evident that portability is going to be key or king for mass camera sales. Of course, there'll always be the pros that carry around the mega 600mm lenses and their big, weather sealed sports bodies. There'll always be those guys there, here and there. But as time goes on, I think a lot of people, as they mature in their photography, they start realizing that if I'm going to go out and actually take photos and not just sit online on the forum or make YouTube videos about gear, that you have to get out and shoot. And what's the reality of how often you get out and shoot if you're carrying around a big camera? It's not as often as if you have something that's more portable and pocketable with you. So I think this is where Micro Four Thirds can win. And hear me out. If anybody has used a cell phone as of late, like a Google Pixel 3 or an iPhone XS or a Huawei, I think the P30 is the new one. I don't know, don't quote me. But if you use any of those, you'll see there's some tremendous strides being done in computational photography. In fact, we're still in its infancy. And I think that's why I'm going to make this point. I'm going to bring this thing around to everybody here and tell you why Micro Four Thirds or any small sensor camera could be the death of full frame. I believe that computational photography is at its infancy and it's super, super interesting where it's going. If anybody's used Night Sight on the Google Pixel 3, it does some very, very incredible things in terms of low light photography in a small, tiny sensor on a cell phone with a small piece of glass in front of it. And one of the big complaints about Micro Four Thirds versus full frame is its light gathering capability. If you apply that technology that's in the Google Pixel 3 to a Micro Four Thirds sensor and then put R&D dollars into it and advance it, I think the possibilities there are really, really, really exciting. The other one is bokeh. A lot of these new cell phones are doing simulated bokeh. And to be honest with you, I think bokeh is a little overrated. I think that's kind of an amateur move. It is pleasing in some circumstances. That's a different video for a different topic. But even though the cell phone bokeh looks fake and there's not that nice fall off, it doesn't drop off evenly, and you can always tell the difference, it's still in its infancy. And as these depth cameras and depth sensors get better, they're going to get much, much better at actually simulating bokeh even better. And so I don't see it being unreasonable to think that you couldn't have some kind of computational option or some kind of computational feature into a small sensored camera that would allow you to change your depth of field on a realistic basis, especially when you have a sensor that can actually create depth of field. It's not like these Micro Four Thirds cameras are far off from what I'm shooting on now, an APS-C sensor. You can get depth of field very easily on Micro Four Thirds cameras. In fact, I can get depth of field on my cell phone without imitating it just by controlling distance. Again, a different video for a different time. So I really think that as people start realizing that portability and functionality is key, that the small differences between Micro Four Thirds and full frame sensors, even though there are differences, I'm not denying that, when computational blends with Micro Four Thirds sensors or smaller sensored cameras, I think things get really, really interesting. And I think any pro would be happy to downsize their kit instead of carrying around giant 600mm lenses and maybe carrying around something small like this. They would take the opportunity. Not everybody. I know everybody's mileage varies differently, but you can't tell me that most people wouldn't want to downsize their kit. Who wants to hike with 30 pounds of gear on their back? It's insane. That's why I traded in. I'm also not a pro. But I think people need to think about the future of photography differently. Right now there's this craze on YouTube about dynamic range and high ISO. Like, are you shooting at 102,000 ISO? It's crazy, man. If you are, something's wrong. And so it's a big spec war right now. It's almost like the race of more megapixels. At some point, 40 megapixel, 50 megapixel. I mean, you're not printing billboard signs. Most of you aren't. It's a very specialized niche megapixel count. I'm sure I'm just like, you guys are probably furiously typing down there right now. But if you just take a step back and think about what I'm saying a little bit, I think portability wins at the end of the day. And when computational photography and sensor advancement comes into play to close the gap between what the full frame sensors can do and the smaller sensors can do, I think the case for big cameras starts going out the window pretty quickly. Faster than what small sensors would do. I know as of recently, portability is king for me. And I'm sure a lot of you out there feel the same way. If not, go shoot a lot more. Start taking photography seriously. And I think after a while, once you get past the nostalgia of the gear and you realize that it's this guy behind the camera, not so much the camera itself, to some limits, you start appreciating size, portability, and functionality over the small gains in dynamic range, or maybe 2 extra stops of high ISO noise performance, or maybe the greater or shallower depth of field. Anyways, now that I've ignited this flame war, please let me know in the comments below what you guys think. And yeah, see you guys next time.